uses alt. That's why it's a good hotkey binder.
Food for thought.
I mean, I'm sure something uses alt, but not. Usually we only use alt after control and shift are used up.
Or in tandem with control and shift. Control, alt, tab, gillate.
Welcome to Two Nerds Mukbang this week. We're not going to explain what we're eating.
That could really start to turn suspect.
Just get right up on the mic and we'll let people guess.
Well, another book read.
Okay. Launching straight in before the game's even up.
Yep.
I mean, the game's up, but are you?
Can you hear from the sound whether I'm up or not?
Can you hear?
No!
Hey, if it's singing, that's a problem. You got to go to the doctor about that.
Oh, I wasn't following that train of thought.
A man who can make his genitals whistle, among other sounds.
Anything else he's got two of?
You don't know Craig Ferguson enough.
No, I don't. That is true. I actually like him a lot, but I don't know him enough. I've read...
something of a devotee of the Craig Ferguson show. I know that's not what it's called, but that's what I'm calling it because it was better.
I've been reading a little bit more of Lovecraft, and I read The Man in the Cave.
You're starting with the short stories, which are the only things I haven't read.
Oh, well, that's sad.
So I can't comment. I started with the long form stuff, and I'm now working my way into the short stories.
Gotcha. Well, this one is great. It's in very true fashion.
Hang on, this might still be too loud. It didn't sound as loud on the menu screen, but it's louder now, mostly just because it's so much clearer. Is it the big one?
Yes, it is.
You don't just press the big red button.
It's
sad that we can't enjoy the fruits of our good sound because it would block our less good sound coming from our mouths. like this.
I just recently got my Pioneer tower control tower audio file thing set up, and it's great.
Is that the technical name?
Yes, it is.
You look that up on Google, kids.
No, it's a massive old school Pioneer tower, and for those of you that care to know, it's not that I'm specifically only a Pioneer person as much as it is I am definitely an audiophile, and I found that these are very, very effective. As much as they're old, they still get the job done. It does everything, and I've now retrofitted it to Bluetooth.
That's something for life.
So
old stuff gets the job done.
Well, but see, I actually was this came up recently when I was thinking about the whole
I'm curious about whatever
discussion.
Okay, are you going to get back to your other
topic
though?
Because I was
curious about
I died immediately. What a surprise.
Well, I mean, I was watching it happen, so it wasn't a surprise to me.
I don't think it was a surprise to the audience either.
All right, now we do have to... This guy is a total wimp, though, too. So, I mean, it's embarrassing that he's spanking us so hard.
You want to just sit on that for a second?
No, I don't. It hurts to sit on.
In watching... several boot videos and things of that nature. When it was actually also, this came to me when I was watching that.
Came to me in a dream.
German bespoke suit guy. What's his name?
German.
We'll mention him maybe in the comments, but he's a brilliant guy, and what he was actually doing was basically attacking Well, attacking is a little strong.
I was about to say.
He was offsetting the whole suit rules and a lot of the kind of fashion.
If I work by just being bold.
And basically just saying...
How do you not excuse you? He's immune to EMPs, it would seem.
And he doesn't give a rat's behind what you think about
puts a major hole in my strategy.
Put a major hole in you, too. Anyway, he was coming out to say...
Coming out? No.
The rules of fashion, when applied hard and fast without understanding the purpose of them, and in the context of historical...
Isn't that the case with all rules?
Yes, but what he was getting at, like he actually said, bespoke suits are not the best suits. He said, now people are going to say, we're going
to get into the argument you and I had off air, which is best and better only work if you have a defined axis upon which you're measuring.
Well, that, and I think...
Are they the best suits? Well, are they the best made? Probably.
Right.
Are they the best for every application? Not necessarily.
Precisely, and that is exactly what he was getting at. So it is very much that context, and what I was starting to realize even within, like, because this is now something that's come up within Trenton and Heath and very many boot videos that I've watched as well about quality boots, is that there's a balance between everything being hand-stitched and there being some things that they apply with machine. And that's
probably going to be
because
very uncomfortable.
Well, not
those
just
would be
that.
Like they're super stiff and you'll never break them ever, but you'll not necessarily enjoy wearing them.
Right. Well, there's that, and then there's also the idea that some technological advancements actually become beneficial, and you don't need to just shoo them off. And so, there is definitely a balance to saying everything old is useful, but I don't know that it's better inherently. You know what I mean?
I agree. I mean,
well, you were even making that. You were the one making that statement.
I admit I have a luddite tendency where I'm like, old is better almost always, but that's of course not true, and I know that. Well, it's just that.
And we bring ourselves back
again to talk about the concept of the right metric. I do believe that I have a more old sensibility. Therefore, old things serve what I want more accurately.
Truth.
Like I refuse, whenever I buy another car, it will be a car before 1985. If I have the freedom, of course. Like if I have the money where I can buy pretty much whatever I want. And I'm not saying like, it's going to be like a 60s convertible Mustang. I'm saying I don't care if it's a truck. I don't care if it's a frickin' Peugeot. It will be before 1985 because I have learned that all the things I hate about cars started after 1985. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, give it a... well, you're trading blows. Oh, you did get him that... Well, so he just hates me. Maybe it was while he was in the middle of his attack, which I don't think should make him immune from electricity.
It's like the Smash 64 rules, where if you are hitting at the same time, you both just do a little dance, make a little love, get down to
okay. That's not what I'm... Well, goodbye forever, everyone. This is the last one.
Wow. No, what I'm getting at is there is back to, and we've had this discussion many times about really across the board. It's twofold. Number one, we're back to the kind of Zen approach or very Eastern approach of balance, but to a Western sensibilities.
To the sensible Westerner.
No, to
which I am.
To the sensibilities of the Westerner. We're really back to.
Oh, darn it, you monkey! Oh, I still got him. Or
we're
maybe
really
not.
Back to.
No, I didn't. And I'm out of stuff.
The whole idea of.
I thought you said we're really back to Hitler. No. I was like,
Hegel.
I'd certainly hope not.
And the idea.
Okay, I've broken. I've broken the man. The man is broken. He's very much broken.
And he's the idea of finding some sort of middle ground. The extremes on either side are always going to be bad.
Well, so I didn't get much out of my glitchery. I did something to him that he didn't like, but
when you when you say everything old is better, I'm like, I'm not saying you've said that, but when someone says that, or you say everything new is better,
redound to that, even though I know it's not always true.
It's the middle ground. You have to find, okay, what is the truth of both sides?
Even the Luddites had a reasonable point. People should look them up.
Sure.
Because the insult to call someone a Luddite is actually rather ahistorical, because the Luddites had a specific point that they objected to. It wasn't like, we just hate all things that are new. You know the history of the Luddites?
It was
a specific reaction to, I forget exactly what. I'm telling everyone to research it, and I've honestly forgotten it partially myself, but it was a reaction to a specific technological trend.
Right.
And it wasn't like all new things are bad. It was like, we have concerns about this specific new thing that we think will change.
I would make it akin to what we were doing with digital minimalism, which is like, okay, there's a certain degree of it's taking it too far. And again, that doesn't mean now we don't like anything new. It just means that this particular thing is a little bit concerning.
It's interesting that you touch on this, because this has been something I've become more conscious of. Because in recent days and years, I guess the most recent few years, I have begun to be...
He just dropped me like a Christmas ham.
Why are you dropping your Christmas ham? I've begun to become conscious of the fact that many of the things I critique are of modern origin, but also many things that have positively benefited me are as well. And I think I can't name any specific example, because I remember it was something that I had a moment where I was like, this wouldn't have been possible were it not for modern technology. And I forget what it was. I think it had some form of, it was a movie or a show or some music, or it was an artistic thing. Because this is the area where I think this argument comes to a head, is for someone like me who would be arguably, I'm on the verge of being able to call myself a proper film buff these days. And I've always been an maybe not always an audiophile to your extent. More of is there a word for music file specifically? Because to me, I don't care that much about audio fidelity. I just enjoy music as an art form. I'm not sure if there's a separate term for that. But it's like, there's never been a better time to be one of those people. Because stuff gets made these days that could never be made previously.
Sure.
And yet, I think part of that's just as much the issue as it is the positive, because
you have a lot more tools.
Oh no! Here's what it was. Here was part of it. I know I'm misremembering some of it, but like I was watching a video. Okay, I was trying to move, but the game didn't let me. I was watching a video about, was it 2001? The special effects of 2001, and about how. Like cinematographically, that's a fun word to say, they were super advanced and whatnot, and that was juxtaposed with some other modern film that I can't remember, but it was the point of it was Kubrick was obviously pressing the very edges of what was possible with special effects in camera back in those days.
Yeah. And
I forget the example of the other movie that was being used as a similar comparison, because I think the problem is we've made doing
one was like the extreme in the back.
Exactly. Because Kubrick made something that was literally at the edges of being possible.
Right.
And if you were to watch most films today, they're not doing that, despite being vastly more advanced than that film was. Because it's almost like we've taken for granted the things we can do. I made this point actually to my humanities teacher once, where I was like, you look at all of the architecture, like for the fact that the Il Duomo in Venice, the other one. Where does Ezio come from? Florence.
Yeah.
Is made of wood and brick. And it was the largest dome ever built at the time, and is still one of the largest in the world. And it's like, they built that by hand. Like, they barely had the concept of cranes.
But that's the whole idea of, and that's a laziness issue, because we've gotten so comfortable with our technology.
We have so much more ability. I mean, architecture is an interesting example, because there is a growing movement these days that's beginning to sort of demand the better things. That's like, okay, you think about the fact that whatever's the name of that church in Brazil, not Brazil, Barcelona, that's been being built since like 1840.
Oh, I don't know which one.
It's like they're still making it, and that I would say, I mean, that shows just how bold of a design it was that it has taken this long to make, because we now do have modern technology and they're still taking a long time to make it.
Yeah.
But when it is completed, it will no doubt be the most complicated and most architecturally significant building probably ever. I mean, for at least several hundred more years, I would wager.
I would argue
because it's taken so much time.
Wonders of the world thing within its day.
I mean, it certainly should be. I'll admit. Okay. I don't know what I didn't have a strategy other than approach. But
that's his dating strategies too.
Yep. On your knees, just approach. But the point is, it's like, I mean, the comment I made to my teacher was like, they made that with their hands, and I mean, obviously they had certain crane type things with pulleys and stuff like that, but they weren't nearly as sophisticated.
Sure.
And yet we haven't built anything like that since. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why? Because if you were to think, because back then that would have been an architect's like, okay, this is a total pipe dream of like, this would be the hardest thing we could ever make.
Right.
And I don't think any buildings today are like that, where they think this is the hardest thing we could ever make.
No, it's because they the fastest we've ever made it. Because I think it's the easiest we've ever made it.
Even then, I would wager there are buildings that get built by architects who are like big. I mean, most of them sadly are in Dubai, but there are buildings that are made specifically for the sake of architectural exploration, but they tend to just be like, oh, it's a big tower, and it's got a funky shape. But I'm like, is that hard to make, or is it just an abstract design? I mean, I admit I don't know enough about architecture or civil engineering to really weigh in. I imagine there's challenges that are unlike things in the past, but I can't help but feel like there's nothing about them that I look at and think, wow, that must have been such a straining at the very edges of what's possible.
Right. That is the question.
It's a little bit like modern art, where it's like, sure, it might have been complicated, but is what it is on its own worth something? Because I feel like there's a weird sort of interest I have in old architectural drawings.
Like blueprint type?
Not specifically, but like almost the concept drawings. Because you look at, like, I had to. We saw some of these when I actually took architecture as an elective, like an intro course, because I thought it was more interesting than just generic art class. And you do these kinds of studies. It's like, okay, you're gonna just sketch the details of this building. It's like that's what a lot of architects do for their study, is they'll just go to famous buildings and basically recreate them as a means of sort of understanding its fundamentals.
Yeah. I got you.
And just the look of those pieces, it's like this goes to show that the design of the building itself is a work of art without it being built. Like, just the look of it is something that's fun to look at on a 2D piece of paper. I don't think that's at all the case of modern architecture.
No, that is certainly
It's fascinating
true.
When it's built. You're like, oh, this is an odd shape.
But it's often just...
But if you just looked at it as a picture, you'd be like, it just looks like a skyscraper.
Yeah.
And it's like, why, with the technology we have, why don't we press the limits? And it's because all we've come from is the past. So we think, well, this thing is so much more advanced than the past could have made. Therefore, it must be good. And it's like, well, no.
Is it
as good as we could make it today?
Exactly. And sometimes even better than we even are possibly able to make today.
Yeah, and it's
a bit. I'm gonna digress just a squidge.
Digress.
But if you have not yet watched the
Peaky Blinders,
no,
or Arcane,
if you're
not a fan of Alan Watts,
no, if you've not, it's not going to be quite that obvious or on the nose this time.
Jordan Peterson says,
if you have not watched the Milo Murphy yet,
I haven't.
There is a section in which a character is revealed to be the time lord or whatever, and
as in Doctor Who.
No, as in the person that created time travel. Like they call him
Time Lord is actually what
they
Doctor
call
Who
him, like
Professor
Time or something like that. And
okay,
and
it's a little bit generic.
And the essentially what they
see when he's in the middle of his jump strike, that doesn't seem to hurt him.
Essentially, one of the things he says is, I had the time machine built for a long time, but I was waiting for the actual element to be made that would make this functional.
That's a bit of the Howard Stark thing.
Sure,
it's like he had the design for the arc reactor before it could be built because literally the elements didn't exist.
Right, and that's, I think that when we start thinking like that, well, and it's the whole argument of all science fiction has been the guide, I suppose, for where we're heading.
Yeah, for a speech class, that was the topic of my whole discussion that I gave, was how science fiction inspires actual technology. Because ultimately it starts as what is theoretically possible, or even what stretches the bounds of theoretical possibility. A lot of Star Trek did that, and we have a lot of Star Trek technology.
Right.
Star Trek predicted flat screens or touch screens rather, and video communication. It's like these were all pipe dreams back in the day, and yet we have them now. So just because, I mean, I think that's you got to have that element of straining at what's the edge of possibility, because it won't always be the edge.
Right. One.
Grenade battle, apparently. Oh, well. I thought those passed me, but apparently not.
Grenade battle. I just shipped my nightie. Oh dear.
Is this your digression though? Because it wasn't much of a digression.
No. Well, I'm just saying,
still tangentially related.
But I'm just saying that the quoting of Milo Murphy's a little bit like.
Oh, okay.
But I'm just saying it had a similar flavor, and I think the notion that, again, it's the balance thing. You bring it back to, do you throw yourself solely into what can't be yet? No, because then then
you'll never do anything.
Progressive good. But then you also
have to play on the edge.
Right. It's the bleeding edge, but the edge nonetheless.
Well, I mean, that's the thing Jordan Peterson talks about. He's going, that's why people who are creative often struggle, is the fact that that's a difficult balance to maintain, to dance on the edge of the possible without actually, finding yourself frustrated by trying to actually do the impossible. But then there's also the sort of stagnation of that which already has been done. And that's a hard balance to walk. I wish I could remember the film, because I feel like I'm cheapening my revelation of it being significant by not being able to remember it. But it was some kind of experience where I was like, I do have to acknowledge that I couldn't do this without the modern technology that's around. I just wish things that weren't so useless weren't.
I was going to try to just...
Whoa, that's a creepy...
I was trying to just hack him off until he finally was out of all of his grenades.
He's never going to be out of his grenades. He's an NPC. He's got the infinite stash. So it was basically a moment of reckoning. Like, I should be thankful for the fact that the stuff I claim is the wrong with the world isn't.
Yeah.
It's just that the things I wish we were doing with the technology we had is such a minority of what we actually do.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad, because I'm like, all of this generic, banal garbage we produce is just so much of a waste of the stuff that this technology could do. Mm-hmm. And then that somehow becomes what we think it's for, is the generic, banal stuff. And like, that's just such a sad commentary.
Yeah.
Anyways, Lovecraft, I'm curious.
Yeah, so in true fashion, obviously the scary element is that which you cannot identify or see.
Well, of course.
However, this one, and I'm not sure...
I'm on the other side of glass!
I'm not sure how his other short stories compare in this regard.
Well,
but this one has a bit of a turning it on its head hook. That is fascinating.
No.
Is it completely impossible to predict? No, but it's a
I don't think
it's a worthwhile diversion nonetheless.
How tropey is it? Because when you say, is it impossible to predict, I think a story that's impossible to predict is a bad story.
Maybe.
Frozen was impossible to predict because they pulled it out of their butts. I think the best...
What's going to come out? Oh, it's a turd. I mean, that's pretty easy to predict.
Because ultimately, the best plot twist, if we're talking plot twist, which not all horror stories need, but they are a component of the genre, is that which, to me... I am most satisfied with a plot twist if I predict it right before it happens.
This is simple.
That is the ultimate test where I'm like, I bet it's going to be this, and then boom, it's that.
Yeah,
if you see it way too early, and you're like, okay, this is going to be it, so all of the stuff in the between feels like padding.
You can tell he revealed it knowingly.
Well, then I don't think that's a problem.
It's
if you
not.
Can predict
It's
it.
not.
If it's layered enough that you either, to me, it's a matter of proximity to the reveal. Because either it's the domino effect where it's like you reveal the last piece of information and then suddenly it's like, oh, I get the whole thing.
Which I like.
That makes sense. That's the fun way to do it. I personally tend to fall more on I like predicting it right as it happens because that's the best of both worlds. I get to feel a little bit clever, but I also get to be kind of surprised because it's not like, oh, I could see it coming a mile away. I'm like, oh, I feel like I just barely caught on before it was too late. And that's a fun kind of dynamic. So I would say that that's not a problem at all. I don't think he's there.
He was there.
Well,
he was right the freaking...
Oh, he was on the other side. See? And he doesn't seem to... What determines his getting hurt by that seems to be somewhat arbitrary.
So anyway, it was a slow reveal, a little bit more of a slow burn on this one, but
well, a lot of his tend to do that.
But what I liked about it was that one of the characters in the short story,
don't spoil too much.
No. So it's one of those things where he's intentionally revealing it to the audience or to the reader.
And not the character?
Which I'm like, huh. Until the very end. Like, essentially, the character realizes at the very end when you've already kind of figured it out.
Well, that's like, but again, how much what time do you have over the character?
It's enough that...
Because that's another trope
you start to read
giving the audience more information than the character has creates a certain dynamic as well.
Which I appreciate.
That is the definition of one of the forms of irony. I forget which. It's not poetic irony, is it? I think it might be, despite the fact that it's not always poetry. When an audience knows something that the character does not.
It was good. I enjoyed it.
I don't want to ask too much about it because I haven't read it, and I would since I have it's probably in my collection.
Yeah,
I'm saddened that Lovecraft is so much better than many other things.
What does that mean?
I forget what it was I was reading that I was like, Lovecraft did this better. Because it's sort of the pain of... It's the unspoken pain of good things is that other things are subsequently less good because they exist. It's like, because this exists, this now becomes the standard against which all will be compared, and nothing will compare favorably.
Peterson's whole, by having a...
Well, yeah.
By proving... That was wicked.
Didn't even let me pull my shot.
Why?
Well, it's so similar to, like, it's okay, nothing will ever be as good as Arcane, and it's like, as much as I love Arcane, it's sad that now other things are going to be like, well, it's not Arcane.
Well, that's, yeah.
I mean, I don't have to make that comparison. To get back to the Zen topic, that's one of those things that you kind of have to weigh up. My esteem for this thing is a choice I have. Is it worth the consequence of other things not measuring up? Because you could just as easily be like, you know what, I'm going to loosen my standards. And be like, because that's to be exceptionally picky, I guess, if you want to put it in a more negative light, is not always positive, because it does mean you're not going to enjoy that much stuff. So you have to weigh up the amount that I enjoy something. If I take it really seriously, then a very scant few things will hit that mark, but they will be the best things ever. And the feeling they will give you and the fulfillment is going to be proportionate to how much you care. So you could choose to care less and you'll like more things, but you won't like them as much. And you could choose to like less things, but you'll like them. You just have to make up your mind of, is my frustration at everything else going to be worth my satisfaction at how good this is in comparison?
I was reading a psychologist. I can't remember who it was. What was his name?
Danny Boy.
No. I gave that an answer like it was an actual. What was his name? Oh, his name is escaping.
What's his name?
But what he was saying was all of psychology is essentially giving people the understanding that they have control over their own behaviors.
Well, it's the Stoic principle where you have to realize everything you do is a choice. That doesn't make it wrong, nor does it make it right. Like, I mean, I feel as though I can only really describe it in context of a specific realization, and wow, even just backing away is hard. I almost feel like we need to not attack at all at the beginning, because if you do, you can never get out of the way of the first attack. I don't know how specific I need to get to bring this across, but basically, I was watching in a group a film that is like one of my favorite films ever, and I suppose I can spoil the fact that it's I quite seriously admire It's a Wonderful Life. I know you don't care about it as much as I do.
It's good. I've had to come back to it because obviously I had issue or experience with it.
I had issues.
I had issues. Yeah, I had experience with it from a theatrical context, and it was not.
Well, I'm glad you got over that, because I always felt like that wasn't a fair criticism.
Well,
But that's like a film that I deeply respect, and actually is one of those few films where I'm like, I find myself emotionally invested in this fully. And yet, when you watch something like that in a group, if other people don't take it as seriously, it almost kind of annoys and feels almost insulting, because if you choose to identify with something strongly, then you are investing a part of yourself in it. He was on the other side of the wall, so I think, he's like just all over the place. You sat on those like little eggs. Hatched a murder baby.
Maybe I just wanted my colon to have a violent cleaning.
I guess that worked. But anyway, so the point I'm saying is, like, that's a choice you make to say, I'm choosing to invest part of myself in this, which means if other people show it disrespect, I almost feel like I'm being disrespected. But of course, that's not fair.
You're not. Yeah,
that's not fair. And I had to make that recognition. I was like, I'm getting annoyed that everyone's sort of talking over this and interrupting, and I'm just like, I'd really like to engage with this thing that is important to me. And then I realized, well, that's still my choice. I'm choosing to be mad right now, and that's not. You don't think of it that way, because emotions you tend to think of as things that happen to you.
Well, it's like you're making me mad or whatever. This is true specifically in the English language. What's interesting is in other languages, it's not quite the same. Like in Spanish, it's I have anger. Like I possess anger right now.
I don't know enough Spanish. I know that that's also true of, like, you say I have hunger. You are not hungry.
Right.
Hunger is a thing you have. So is thirst. So it makes sense that emotions would be the same.
But I just find that interesting, because it's not you made me angry or that makes me angry.
Okay, am I dead or alive? I was dead. When it flashes like that, I can't even see myself fall over.
I want to know if I'm dead or alive. But yeah, I think that is a very uniquely American
I don't know about that. I mean, maybe you could argue that it's because of the English language. I'm sure there may be other languages that do the same thing.
I should clarify. Not uniquely American. I would say it is, in Western culture, it is magnified, maybe.
Well, because
to say that somehow other external circumstances are enacting upon us.
Well, that's very Western, and I think that's what the Stoics were combating, is saying, and it's an Alan Wattsism, since we're going to hit all the rules today. It's you beat your heart is one of the things Alan Watts likes to talk about all the time, because it's the most sort of concrete, perplexing example to people. Or rather, the one he always gives that's even better is you breathe. sometimes you breathe voluntarily. Like if you're trying to catch your breath, you're thinking about breathing.
Right.
But when you stop thinking about it, you keep breathing. Breath is a thing that is both consciously and unconsciously controlled. So is it correct to say...
He's just jumping around like a freaking monkey.
I tell you, he does it all the time. Why do you... I can hook those too.
Well, I'm trying to kind of...
I think you hit the wall, though. I don't think you got him.
No!
Except, see, the thing is, he's standing in the spot, and then he doesn't react like he's being zapped. I don't get it. But the point is, your emotions are like that, where you do them.
Yeah.
Nobody else gives them to you. You're giving them to yourself, but you're not doing it consciously, so you think of it as like,
and it comes
this
back...
happened and I got mad.
Yeah.
Therefore, that thing made me mad. It's like, well, no, you reacted, and you have the capacity to revoke said reaction.
Right. Well,
but that's where I think the Zen aspect of it comes from. The fact, this is sort of what Alan Watts talks about, is the difference between Buddhism and Zen, is that Buddhism is so ascetic that it says because you can revoke this reaction, you should, because therefore then you're freeing yourself of attachment and whatnot.
Well, it's like, no.
Whereas the Zen perspective is, I just should acknowledge that I'm choosing this. Because it's not that it's a wrong choice, and I had to come to that conclusion. I was like, okay, why am I don't like that I'm upset, because it's not pleasant feeling. But then I also made me go think about it. I was like, okay, why am I upset? I'm upset because I care about this thing. To not be upset right now, I would have to not care.
Well, and
that's not something I'm willing to do.
What we're getting back to is
so instead you just say, okay, I feel
agency.
Exactly, and that's what it is. You don't always have to change what you do. Oftentimes, you just have to change how you think about it. It's like, I was still kind of frustrated.
Right.
But I accepted that frustration as the cost of liking this thing this much.
Right.
And then once you think about it that way, you think, I'd rather have something that matters this much to me that it makes me mad.
Right.
Rather than not caring enough to never be mad.
Right. Well, and that's again back to that book that I was reading that we had talked about last week. But it's the whole idea of when people are living their life by default in the System 1 kind of context, and not in the agent.
I need to use my jumping
System
ability.
2. What you're doing is not living what most people would call, the Stoic perspective. I think, and to a lesser degree, the Westernized perspective.
Well, that is the Stoic. Stoics we're still Western.
But I'm just saying, is a sometimes called logical, but really what in what the psychologist
the mind
is getting
from the spirit,
and what the psychologist gets at is that it's not logical as much as it is engaged. It is I'm considering why I'm making this perspective, why it is that I hold this belief, and whether or not my System 2, my agent, is going to actually accept that and go, okay, yeah, now I'm moving ahead.
Well, and I think that's what throws some people off with the Buddhist sort of, is they think you have to let go. And that's sort of where the Zen would say, no. This is Alan Watts again. It's in actually the book. You might recognize the story where he talks about the monk who learns that his parents have died in an accident, and so he's found out in the woods crying, and one of his mentors comes to him and says, why are you crying? Don't you realize that, death is a part of life, and you haven't really lost anything because you never had them? And he gives him all of the platitudes. And eventually the monk interrupts him and says, don't you see that I'm crying because I want to? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of framed as his moment of revelation. Is it's like, you don't, simply because it's like, I can be detached from this, doesn't mean that you have to. You just have to be consciously attached.
Right.
Because then it's sort of the holding with an open hand concept. I think the trouble with, okay, he's right there.
I know he is.
And I'm just going to sit and wait. Whoop. He's playing games with you. Wow, he was!
That was some next level nonsense.
Wow. Give him some credit. I think many people think of the sort of ascetic Buddhist thing as like, you shouldn't touch anything. Whereas the Zen teaching is you hold with an open hand, which means you can interact with it. Just be willing to let it go. Well, it doesn't mean you can't touch it and appreciate it while it's there. You don't have to be so hands-off.
Which is why we've talked about how Zen and Stoicism really are.
I think, they're
very
Eastern and Western
together.
Perspectives of the same fundamental
thought, which
precept.
is, again, let what be.
Yes. I mean, that's when you talk about control that which you can control, and your emotions are that.
Yeah.
But then you also have to acknowledge that you don't have to revoke them simply because you can. You can say, you know what, I am mad. I am mad right now, and I'm choosing to stay mad. And many people don't want to do that because they think, well, being mad's a bad thing, and I should be the bigger, and I should grow up. And it's like, no, being mad's a valid choice. Just make it validly.
Right.
And stick with it.
Well, and there are going to be times that you actually choose to
and also
share
pay the
your
consequences. That's the primary thing.
It depends on the context of who you're with, or hey, this is actually something that I feel strongly enough about that maybe on a conviction level you go, I must share my displeasure of this.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is you can choose to be mad for any reason. I'll be perfectly frank, although I don't know that you'll always want to.
Right.
You could choose to have whatever reaction you have. You just have to A, do it consciously, and B, accept the consequences. That's the other thing. You could be really persnickety and uptight and get mad easily. And I mean, if you're doing that consciously, I would say that's better than doing it unconsciously. But you're also going to have to pay the consequence of, like, people are going to be annoyed at you and they're not going to want to hang out with you.
Right.
And if you're willing to do that, then that's a trade-off you're making. And if you're doing it consciously, you can't be bitter about it in that instance. Right. And I think that's the difference is bitterness, it's sort of, the concept that resentment is... I forget what Jordan Peterson says about it, but it's like that's the one thing that you do probably need to avoid. Because resentment isn't exactly an emotion. It's more insidious than that. It is. Because again, you can be mad justifiably.
Thought pattern, I would argue, because what you're doing is you're deciding...
It's an attitude and a personality. I mean, it becomes everything.
Right. That's why I'm saying it's a thought pattern that literally becomes so invasive that it becomes a part of your standard belief structure.
Well, and I think
because when you start to frame something around a particular event or maybe...
Well, especially when you externalize it.
Right, exactly.
You then sort of feel as though you've been unjustly dealt.
Well, but
you haven't. Again, you have to know you made that choice. And that's why you can be angry and not bitter. Because you're going, okay, in this moment, this thing bothers me. I'm choosing to be bothered by it because I care, and I'm choosing not to revoke my care. Those still hurt you. Just because they've activated doesn't mean they still won't harm you.
Yeah, I thought that...
The explosive ones don't do that, but the EMPs will still hurt if they're flashing. Because if you just suck it up... And this is what Jordan Peterson talks about, is the difficulty with the highly agreeable people, is that they tend to suck things up, but they still are externalized.
Right.
Which then that breeds resentment because some subconscious part of you doesn't want to be put upon the way you feel you are being.
Right.
Whether you are or not. Sometimes you are, in which case you should say something about it, but sometimes it's you just need to grow up. Right. And realize, you know what? I reacted this way. I can either recant and say I was wrong. I mean, people seem to be comfortable enough to do that. If they react angrily and then realize, I thought about it and I shouldn't have done that, and so I'm sorry, that's an adult thing to do. But I think an even more adult thing to do is to simply accept it and go, yeah, I was angry and this is why. It's because I hold these value structures that I'm not willing to compromise on, and that's my own choice, which means it's not your fault.
But again, it depends on contextual nature. Like, I think there are times in my own life even that I have reacted in frustration or anger more than I would have liked to because at the time I was functioning in a very visceral System 1 context where I wasn't specifically...
That was the most delayed throw ever. Thanks for that.
Using a lot of personal agency. And I come back and go, you know what? I didn't need to do that. And that was just a pure reaction and it wasn't necessary. There are other times, though, you do need to just validate, you know what? I did mean to do that and I'm still pretty upset about it.
I mean, it's calling a spade a spade.
Right.
Be what you are. And just accept it, because the idea is the fact that if you value something enough that it drives a wedge between you and someone else, you can't be bitter at them.
Yeah.
You have to acknowledge that I choose what I value. So if I react negatively because I feel that, you're disrespecting something I value, I can either reevaluate what I think and realize I value this more than that, therefore I will recant my my frustration.
Yeah.
Or... you have to say, no, I value this so much that if you refuse to accept it, we will have to go our separate ways. And you have to recognize that was also your choice. You can't get mad at the person and say, it's because they didn't do this that I feel like this. And I will hold that anger because I feel wronged. And it's like, no, acknowledge that people just don't... I think we are a hyper-agreeable society these days. To such an extent that people... Because that's the other thing Jordan Peterson talks about, is resentment is immune to agreeableness. If you're just a bit spineless and you go along with what other people want just because you're conflict averse, there is some subconscious part of you that will be annoyed continuously, even if your conscious mind tries to be conciliatory.
Sure.
And that's going to bubble over. Whereas if you just acknowledge, you know what, we are two fundamentally different people who won't be able to get along very well, that comes across as a disagreeable thing to do, but it prevents resentment, which is the worst thing. It'd be better to say, the quote I like is, better just division than corrupt unity.
Well,
it's like, if we have to be different because we value these things, accept that. Don't blame the other person for it.
It echoes something that I tell our boys all the time, which is, you want to be the kind of man that fails honestly and succeeds honestly. I'd rather be the type of person that just is honest enough with myself to go, hey, I screwed it up in this particular regard, and in other times saying, I actually really did well, and I'm going to be honest with myself in that regard. Because when we downplay situations and scenarios where we maybe didn't hit the mark or it didn't go the way we wanted or whatever else, rather than learning from them, or even to a lesser degree integrating them into future context for how this particular person is going to interact with me in the future or whatever, then we aren't allowing the... Jordan Peterson talks about the idea of, again, embracing difficulty to a degree, because when we go through things, there are going to be situations that bring us through and give us learning experience and give us perspectives that we would have not otherwise had. And so, to be honest about your life situations and fail honestly and succeed honestly is similar kind of sentiment. I mean, I
think you just need to be what you are.
Right.
And many people don't want to do that because they view it as... Again, they think, I would be making a fuss, or I would be being too disagreeable if I did this. My family makes fun of me for the fact that I will unfriend people on Facebook if I don't feel the need to talk with them again. And they view that as like, isn't that kind of extreme? That you don't need to do that because you could just unfollow. That way you don't... Because I guess there's this thought that, well, what if they found out? To which I go... The fact that I'm considering unfriending them means I don't care. And that's viewed as like, I'm so harsh. And I'm just like, but I don't care. I have the right to not care.
Yeah.
This person's existence is not contingent upon my approval.
No one gives a freak about you.
So it's just, why do we, there's this really sort of it's this sort of hyper agreeableness where you can't offend and you can't just be honest. And it's like, I would rather be honest and be on the same page.
Yeah.
I don't want to both falsely be on one page.
Well, that's what I mean. It's false unity is still disunity in disguise.
Let's see what this does.
Nothing. No, get out. You're spoiling his moment.
I got 3 straight hits. The question is, how many hits do I need? Because I don't not get hits. It's just he seems to require a whole lot more than I can give. Where are you coming from? Where are you going?
Cotton Eye Joe.
I was gonna... you didn't sing the full lyrics. I was gonna get there. I threw that in a roundabout way, so whether or not he's stunned by it... He's not! So he was in the middle of that and did not get stunned by it. Why am I on my knees? So I don't think those work on him, and I think we're just going to have to abandon them.
Is there a reason that particular gun is there?
Which one?
The one that's...
That one, it's just a reload for the one we have.
Okay.
I mean, they give us ammo of all sorts of weapons, so... Anyways, the point is honesty about the truth, because you can't deny reality for long.
Well, it's the whole piece of possible truth at all costs. Again, it's back to that.
Again, you would rather be correctly divided from those with whom you cannot coexist than to be falsely attempting to do so.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. See, with invisibility is part of the problem. Ah!
Okay.
Well, now I'm surprised that didn't disconnect it. I can shrug and it'll disconnect. But if I throw it across the room, it's fine. It's all just... There's not enough introspection.
Well, that's it. Again, it comes back to the idea of engagement.
It's
are
the
you
recognition,
actually engaged with yourself?
Well, and the acknowledgement that you are never not in control. That's
correct.
That's the fundamental Stoic principle. And this is what's interesting is that it's sort of the Cartesian mind-body duality that's pervaded Western culture to this day, of the idea that somehow...
Not the Stoic principle, but the idea that...
it's the idea that the
separate.
mind and the world are separate.
Right.
Which is, I mean, it's a sort of Alan Watts would argue against such a thing. And I think the Stoics don't make the same arguments, but reach the same conclusions.
Sure.
Which is that...
Oh, shoot.
I don't think it's going to get him.
It's not even going to touch him, probably.
Well, I mean,
Watch this one be the one who's
I don't think
like,
it does anyways, but... I forgot my point. That's embarrassing. I was talking about this Alan Watts and Descartes and what's it though? What was the point of that? Mind-body duality.
Yeah.
Because the Stoics, one of my favorite passages from, I believe it's Epictetus, where he goes on this sort of hypothetical. It's like if someone threatens to imprison you, you might think, well, that means you're not in control. But are you in control of your health? Are you in control of the world around you? If the answer to those things is no, so why would you assume that you would be in control of being imprisoned? Like what you control is yourself. And that doesn't always mean even your body. I mean, he makes a point at one point where he jokes where he's saying, someone they can threaten to exile you, they can threaten to kill you. He said, he says this hypothetical discussion where I think it's like the emperor or someone's threatening, saying, I can have you imprisoned, I can kill you. And he says, no, all you have power over is my corpse, and you're welcome to it. Because it's like that you recognize in certain areas that you don't control these things, and yet in other times you think that you can.
Yeah.
It's like if they put you in prison, guess what you're still in control of? Yourself.
Yeah.
You can choose to make of that circumstance what you will. That choice is always within you. There isn't so much of this... I forget which of them is. I think it's a Rousseauian idea of like the only true freedom is freedom essentially from reality, which is like not only should I be able to make my own choices, but I should be able to make any conceivable choice, whether reality permits it or not. I mean, sadly, we're still living in this era where people believe that, well, this thing should theoretically be possible because I will it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if nature itself opposes that...
What makes that true for you? Well, just simply because I will it.
Well, exactly. And if nature itself opposes it, then nature is the oppressive force. And it's like, okay, sure, that's a fight you can choose to fight. You're just choosing to lose at that point. And the problem, again, if you want to do that, that's valid. Only when you accept consequences, though. I think oh, come on, that shouldn't have hit me from up here. I mean, I was toying with whether or not that would make a difference.
What are you going to do with that spear? Oh.
It's like, if you want to, you can choose, once again, to live in opposition to reality, if you so choose, but you cannot avoid the consequences of doing so. If you say, I want to live like this and reality, get bent, okay. But you can't force you have to be consistent. If you're saying screw reality, then screw reality. Don't then get mad that reality doesn't comply. You just told it to screw itself. So you can't be mad that something doesn't comply and then tell it to go off and not comply.
Yeah.
If you choose to live in opposition to something, accept that that's your choice and the consequences therefore are yours.
Right.
This is the thing that I think is a sort of people think you. I mean, I think you would be well advised to adhere to reality, if only because the fact that you refuse to accept the consequences suggests that you don't actually want to make this choice. That's what I mean by the Rousseauian thing, is we don't have that one. That's again, we don't have.
Well, that may be helpful.
Well, it might, but we don't have any ammo for it, so we would only be able to use it in this one fight. if you're not willing to accept the consequences, then you don't want to make the choice. And that's where the Rousseauian nonsense is, the idea that you should be able to make the choice without the consequences, because otherwise you're not free. Because the choice isn't free if it has consequences. And it's like, that is the antithesis of the Stoic concept.
Yes.
You always have the choice, and with every choice comes consequences. If you're willing to accept the consequences, then you are the freest you could ever be. Because literally, you could be in prison. He makes a quote that I think is interesting. It's hard to remember the exact translation of it because it was sort of an allegory of, in Greek, whatever it would be. But he says that, I forget, I think he was talking about the Athenians or one of the major cities and like the culture of the people of it, saying that Athenians are like, or it might have been a different city, but I think he says Athenians are like some species of fish, and that they can never be held captive, because the moment they are in captivity, they will die. Because there's an element of, if you accept the consequences, where you say, you know what, I'm willing to die to live by my own means, that's the ultimate freedom. You can't say, you must validate what I'm choosing, and therefore let me be. It's like, no, you will either let me be, or you will kill me, but I won't have any alternatives. I will either be a free man or I will be dead. And you have that choice at all times. It's just that most people aren't willing to choose to be dead. Understandably so, but I mean, you gotta accept it. Every choice is valid providing you accept the consequences. Dodging the consequences only showcases the invalidity of the choice.
Well, it also, not only the invalidity of the choice, but also your lack of
maturity and wisdom and all the other things.
Maturity, but forethought too in making choices. Again, what you're revealing about yourself is that you make choices on an instinctual, non-agency based reaction, and it's like, okay, that's fine if you choose to react that way, but what you're doing is essentially what your brain is designed biologically to do, which is to shorthand and make things easier for itself, and basically just accepting that you're a lazy individual. And that sounds like a very harsh criticism, but really what it is I'm saying it. And what, again, the psychologist gets at in his book is that we are, by nature, wired to be lazy. We choose the path of least resistance when not guided by our own agency.
Even biologically speaking, that just makes evolutionary sense.
Right.
If you think of the fact that wasting energy is a great way to die.
Right. And so
in a sort of agrarian hunter-gatherer society, that is a great way to die. The trouble is we have not caught up psychologically with our advancement in society, where now being lazy is actually far more feasible. See, sometimes he reacts weirdly. It's like you never had the luxury of being lazy in the past because you would be dead otherwise. Now we live in such a society that being lazy can still lead you a fairly comfortable life.
Right. And in fact, you can be praised for it because isn't he such a brave individual, or she such a brave individual for living out the life that they want to live? It's like, okay.
Only if they accept the consequences.
Exactly.
That's the thing. I will respect anyone who makes a stupid choice and accepts the consequences. I won't validate that choice, obviously. But that to me showcases a degree of like, okay, again, it's just division. You value this, I value this. We're going to have to go our separate ways. But the fact that both of us are willing to not be have animosity because we both acknowledge that this is our own choice, I appreciate. And I will wish you no harm.
Yeah.
But if you're going to demand that I validate your choice, that's when you go, no. You had a choice and you've made the choice. Well, but the consequences are the choice. To get into the Alan Watts, there is no cause and effect. There is one action.
Right. Well, and
the consequences of your choice are the choice.
Right.
You want the one without the other. That's the biggest issue you see. I even make it. There is. We're gonna get back to sounding awfully Buddhist, but the true conceptualization of karma, which is not the way we think of it in the West, is not that. Again, it's not action and consequences, it's one thing. Like, the thing that I think is the best way of conceptualizing it, because everyone's felt this, is it was at first a joke, But I think there's actually great truth in it when they made the joke that the only time you ever get your belt loop stuck on a door handle is when you're already in a really bad mood. Because it's like that's always the last straw that sets you off. And the answer is that's why it happens.
Right.
It's because that's what karma means. And again, it's a little bit of, to make it sound a little bit more psychologically sensible rather than new agey, because the problem with karma nowadays is that it's so loaded a term, no one's going to listen to you if you use it.
Right.
But it's essentially the argument that Jordan Peterson makes. You're going, your frame of reference, the way you view the world, will affect what the world presents as. Because the world is so complicated, you can only see that which you're looking for. Because your brain has to filter some things out because there's just too much otherwise.
Well,
so
what's fascinating is
when you're in that sort of aggressive, I'm stomping around because I'm mad, that's going to be the time when you're most likely to get your belt loop stuck on the door handle.
Well, and on a
you're mad.
On a Judeo-Christian level, it speaks very acutely to the notion that we, in our own framework of not only thought but also specifically word, like speaking things into existence, you absolutely can end up, self-fulfilling your own prophecy by saying, "Oh, today's going to be a really junky day," and then you have a junky day. It's like that's how that
that's
works.
The greatest. That's the sad advice for like the people give crap for the. I mean, and of course it's too simplified, but it's people sort of have an aggressive reaction when it's like telling a depressed person to cheer up. It's like, is that overly simplified? Of course.
Well, and
but
is
the
it
reason,
insensitive?
But the reason, yes, it's definitely that. But the reason people get offended is because that's actually what needs to happen.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, okay, Jim Carrey has talked about this because I think as new agey as he has gotten,
I actually found
he's
this
also often
as well.
He's got a good point a lot of the time where he talks about
sadness is not the issue.
If you're depressed and you stay in bed and you live you let your hygiene and your living circumstances get degraded to full of gunk, and you're not keeping clean, you're not exercising. The trouble is depression makes you want to do all of these things. And the problem is these things will also make you depressed. So if you're not actively combating these influences, you're not giving yourself a fighting chance, is the way he puts it. That's not to say that the answer is cheer up. I mean, that's obviously way too simplified, and again, it's insensitive. But the fact of the matter is, you have to acknowledge that you are sabotaging yourself by giving in to what your sort of weaker impulse. And that's, again, it's harsh thing because you want to try and be sensitive, but it's like, well, if you don't fix this, it's not going to go away. So I'm sorry if I'm being harsh for pointing that out, but this is also the only way to help yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not to say it will inherently go away, but that's like you're giving yourself a fighting chance is, I think, a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
So I think I forget how that was a bit of a tangent, and I now forget how I was going to bring it back around. Because what were you saying? It was related to what you had just said.
Well,
You forgot too.
I mean, I was getting at the idea that words have power.
Oh yes, your perception does affect the way. Your perception affects the way you feel because, again, that's why I think I understand the New Age perspective where it's some people are going to react or respond better to the more kind of hyper spiritualized manifestation talk.
Well,
and ultimately, it's not wrong. I prefer the more psychological truth, which is the fact that the world is far too complex for you to comprehend, and therefore your mind filters that which is relevant to your goals.
And I don't think they're disconnected. I think
they're the same concept spoken of in different language.
Correct. 100%.
It's like you're going to filter the world because you can't intake all of it at once. Therefore, the filter you have is obviously going to be affected by what you're seeking. If you think of the world in a certain way, the world will manifest in a way that corrects, or not that corrects, but rather affirms your perception. Because your brain is filtering that which you perceive by showing you things that are in alignment with your perception.
Right.
So it sounds sort of hippie mystical to say, well, if you just sort of imagine and you manifest it and you make it so by willing it so. That's obviously too simplified. It's not a tap that you can turn on and off. but there is strong psychological evidence for it.
Well, and I think it's more, as you said.
No. Is he still there?
When you're wiring your brain to look for instance, like let's take something like positives and negatives. If you are wiring your brain to look more for the benefits or the positives in a situation, you're going to be put in a context where your brain is looking for those things and opportunities that may otherwise have escaped you had you been in a negative growth mindset or a negative, perspective.
This is why the film Yes Man is a complicated thing for me.
I would argue. Well, we'll come back to that in just a second because I'm going to make a point.
You're going to get there. Were you going to get there? It's all Jim Carrey.
No.
It's the fifth rule.
I was gonna. I want to come back to that because I'm intrigued about that.
No.
What I'm saying is
the slow and steady.
Arguably, Alan Watts, Zen, and to a lesser degree, but I think still true, the Stoics would argue it's much better. I wouldn't even say a lesser extent. It's much better to find the balance, and again, Hegel, but you go.
I don't want to endorse Hegel consistently because that was one of the only good things he.
Well, that's true, but
because he wrote a lot of other really weird things.
Sure, but I'm just saying.
I'm not a Hegelian.
But the notion of I want to be a person that sees reality. Well, this is why the way. This is why the Tao is the way. Right.
And it's the point of it is. It is the balance between the two, but I also think it's not a knife edge, because you can think of it that way. And I think the way Alan Watts again puts it in a way that's very evocative is he says it's not unlike getting a massage. You sort of relax and give in to the motions that are being pressed against you, but there are also sometimes when it can be equally as sort of relaxing to deliberately tense up specific areas and then release them as the massage goes on. You can fight against the things happening and then give into them, and then that sort of interplay can create just as much of a valid see? Seriously, I wave it with my hands, but I can drop it just fine. It's like that. You don't have to always walk the way. It's like, again, you don't have to stay enlightened is the phrase that sort of struck me the first time I heard him say it. As long as you're conscious, it's sort of like conscious unenlightenment. It's like you can choose to fight against the universe so long as you're doing that consciously, because that's an experience. It's a vinegar taster. It's like that's an experience worth having. You can't get mad at the universe for not complying.
Right.
But you can still do it to see what will happen.
Right.
And maybe it's valid to do. Sometimes that's an experience worth having, but you will. But again, it's not balance as in you have to. It's not the ascetic Buddhist. You must always walk the knife edge, and if you slip so much as an inch, you're done. It's like, no, you can wander between the poles. That's the point. But you shouldn't stay in one side and then expect the way to find you.
Right.
That's anyways. We're not Buddhists, we promise. What were you had a thing you were going to... Oh, yes, Yes Man.
Circle back to Yes Man.
I thought that the film was a little bit of an over-saccharine version of what I think is ultimately a valid concept. It's like there's truth to what the point of the film was, and even to an extent the film acknowledges the limitations of it. Like that's sort of the point of it is you can't say yes to everything because that gets you in... To be exclusively yes is just as bad as to be exclusively no. No! That was me demonstrating the point. And the only problem is I don't think the film leans...
Yes, just take me.
I don't think the film leads enough into that because there is still... It's not like, being in the whole self-help thing of coming from a place of yes. That still bothers me. Because again, it's like... That tries to make it overly simplified and saccharine. It's like, just say yes and it'll all work out. And it's like, that's not the point.
Yeah, no, that's...
I also
it's
think...
a misunderstanding.
As a film, I also think it has some issues. So, I mean, it's not a perfect...
I think it's a misunderstanding of that principle. Anybody who actually thinks that on a speaking things into existence, it's purely
I said
get
it
to
and
say
therefore
it,
it's
therefore
so.
it must be.
Yeah,
you're not understanding the concept fully.
I'm getting pot shots now and then. This might just be the way to go.
Even on an extra biblical level, I would
no.
argue, from somebody who is a theological major, I'm sorry to burst your bubble on a theological level, but if you are one of those that believes that somehow solely speaking something into existence is possible for you,
if you're God,
yeah, exactly.
That's the only person who can do it.
Well, I think that the point that I'm making is that God, I love the way that the Tao, in my opinion, interacts with, and the way that they define the Tao interacts, specifically Alan Watts, interacts with the mystery of who God is, because it is this ill-defined, you can't really put your finger on what it is, if it is really to be the vast...
C.S. Lewis has said it too.
I mean, it's like...
If you could understand God, he would cease to be God.
Correct. 100%.
How boring would there be? How boring would a God you could fully understand be?
Right. And so I think he's put us in systems that respond certainly to our interpretations of them and our but at the same time we can't then, we are not by the counter to like kind of the new age concept of we are in our own rights God in ourselves. It's like, no, you're still missing the point in reality, because we only interact within this on a personal level, on an individual level. In other words, from the Stoic perspective, the only thing I can control, both positive and negatives, is my own experience, not anybody else's. I don't get to dictate that,
Exactly.
As much as I would have loved to, as a father, for instance, dictate how my kids' experiences are going to be. I can't. Both positive and negative. They're going to have experiences that are negative and experiences that are positive, and I can't do a thing about it.
I don't think that's quite right. You can do a thing about it. You can't do everything about it.
Can't do
again,
everything
the Stoic
about it, exactly.
principle. That's what I like about Stoicism, is that
I can do what I can do about it.
Exactly. Unlike Buddhism, which would go so far as to say that you can't do anything about it, so you just have to totally give up, and in giving up you find yourself. It's like, that's not, strictly speaking, the wrong conception, but the Stoics would say you do have control over some things.
Right.
And in fact, the reason why you feel like you're out of control in life is probably because you're trying to control the things you can't.
Correct.
So much that you fail to see the things you can.
Right.
Once you give up control of the things you can't have, you can have the things you can have. But you have to stop trying to control the other stuff first. It's a little bit of you give up one and you get the other. And you'll realize how much control you really do have. No! I was making it a while. I thought he was stuck in that explosion. Yeah. I think that's the strategy going forward. But you have a wrap-up for our... whatever this has been?
Not a good one.
Hit me
here's
with
the thing. This is the best I can do to wrap it up.
Best I can do is $6.
I'll give you $6.50. How about that?